In this film, we start with Redshift and with the topic Progressive Rendering and Bucket Rendering. I now have here a 3D model from the website Mechabricks called Space Shuttle, exported as OBJ, and have deleted all the material so we can focus more on that here, on what we want to do here, so that we don't get too distracted by the materials. We can now do the rendering in Redshift directly in the viewport by clicking here above. Go to Redshift in the viewport and then click Start IPR here, Interactive Preview Renderer. I can start with that here. Then this will start right here with the rendering. It checks a bit for me and it flickers sometimes a bit too. This is simply because the screen is in the background recorded. If the quality is very bad here, you could under Redshift here simply under Options, under scale, set the whole thing to 100 like me. When it's here now, for example, 25 stands, the quality is clearly worse and the whole thing is also more performant here. We can also stop the whole thing by simply repeating click start stop IPR. Now we can do the rendering directly in a separate window. To do this, we go to the Redshift in the menu, Redshift Render View, and then we find here also a button, Start Stop IPR, and as soon as I click here, the rendering takes place in this window. I can't move into this window. I have to stay here in the window, in the viewport. And now, of course, I can pull this window onto a second monitor, but I also have here the advantage that I have more functions here than when I would only render in the viewport. Now let's pull a light in here next. Then we find here at the bottom of the menu under Redshift, once the entry lights, then I just use an area light. Let's just place this area light right here in the middle. Like this, you are used to from Cinema 4D, turn that 90 degrees, put that a little further away. Then I would say that we change the brightness down of that light. Nothing new so far. So until now, the same workflow as in Cinema 4D. I click on the light, go down here to object, then I have down here now different categories. Of course, we will take a closer look at all of that later. Then go on intensity, then I set the intensity to, let's say, 10%. That light is physically here now correctly. Here we now have an inverse quadratic decrease. That is also when we move the light closer to the object. It gets lighter, we go further away, it gets darker. When I make it smaller, it gets darker. If I make it bigger, it gets brighter again. The light is reflected in materials, not with us, no, because we have no materials. The light also casts a shadow. Everything behaves here in exactly the same way as if we were working with Cinema 4D's lights. There are all the parameters already set that way, so we don't have to worry about that at all in Redshift. That's included here by default. Now let's get a little closer to our 3D object. Then we can now see in the rendering a progress bar below. That looks a bit small to me, progressive rendering. There you can see the progress bar, which slowly counts from 0 to 100. This parameter indicates how far the rendering has progressed. We can adjust the time and the render settings. As usual in Cinema 4D, on Edit Render Presets, and switch the renderer to Redshift. Then we click on Redshift and then we find under Progressive Passes, the passes from the progressive rendering. The mode is set to basic, so we are staying here now in this chapter. We will see that we will get very far in the basic settings. By default, this is already set to 1024. When it reached 1024, it is as 100%, and that's actually self-explanatory. If I enter 100 here, the progress bar is of course much faster. If I enter 10 here, for example, then we will see that the quality is much worse, and then we will see here also an image noise. Let's just get a little closer so we can see it a little bit better. And if we were done with the picture here, for example, like this one, and would therefore already be happy and would like to render this image, and now up here, as you are used to from Cinema 4D, click on Render in Image Manager, and the whole thing will work directly final rendered. But if you look at the rendering looks, then we don't see the text progressive passes. And we also see that the rendering here is somehow different calculated. Here we see individual boxes. This is so-called bucket rendering. Then we already see that the parameter progressive passes has nothing to do with the final result. The first thing we need to remember here, progressive passes is first only intended for a preview. The lower I set the value, the faster I see the result, which of course is wonderfully suitable to adjust materials or for the adjustment of lights. The final image is not controlled by progressive passes, but by bucket quality. For the bucket quality, we see different presets here, low, medium, high, and very high. And logically, the higher I set this, the longer the rendering takes. Of course, the quality will also improve. It's all controlled here by a single parameter called threshold. And you can see the higher I set the quality, the lower the threshold. And if I enter my own value here, it jumps here automatically to custom. The final rendering takes place via bucket rendering. That would be a bit annoying at some point if you constantly have to render the final image to assess the final quality. That is why there is also the possibility of this bucket rendering directly in the render view. To see the final result, we don't always render in the image manager. We can also simply click on this button, bucket rendering. If I press it here now, the rendering starts exactly as it is here, seen in the final image. The boxes we can see are called buckets. The settings are automatically taken over from the presets. Now let's see what is now the difference when I work with these presets. I would say let's start rendering this picture. I will delete the old one now. Let's start with the low and start the whole thing. Let's see the difference from the individual render times of these presets. Let's have a look at the render times and of course the quality. I go to 100% in the picture and start here. I need to scale that up a bit. Let's go up to 250%. Then we see some image noise here overall. If I now go to medium, this becomes clear here. When I'm on high, it gets a tiny bit better, but it's only a little bit better. And on very high, I see a very, very small change. But we see from the render time, there are very high differences. 9 seconds, 21, 37, and over 1 minute. What I would recommend that you do first, before you set it to very high, this is not absolutely necessary here. Of course, you do test renderings here first. Do it directly in the render view window. You can also do a simple snippet by clicking this button above for region or hold down the shift key. Then you could create such a region or pull up area. Then you can zoom in and then render this area via bucket rendering. Then you can already see what you're aiming for. If you set the whole thing from low, medium, high or very high, then you can use, of course, save a lot of final rendering time. We can switch off the render region again by simply click again. How is the general workflow now? Very easily, you start by adjusting the light by your works with the progressive passes here. Then, of course, you can, under the progressive passes, enter a higher value, here e.g. 100. If this is enough for you, then you can be interactive here. First, set the perspective. You can always do it directly in the viewport. This is all very fast from the point of view. Of course, there is no point if you do the whole thing in bucket mode, but it always takes quite a while until the rendering starts here. He always waits until the rendering starts, until I let go of the mouse button. But if I switch the whole thing to progressive mode, it starts rendering immediately. adjust the perspective, adjust the lights, and if you're finally done with all the settings, then you can dive into the bucket rendering, then click here, resize to 100%, and then can work here with bucket quality until I get the good quality here have found. And when I'm happy with that, I just press up here the button Render in Image Manager. That's it. Now everything I have in this movie wanted to show. Now we have seen the difference between progressive passes and bucket rendering. Thank you very much.